remain among the most primitive I've ever seen. We're talking about mud huts with corrugated metal roofs, no electricity, no toilets, no water, no sewers. It's a very primitive life. And in India, there's all sorts of different squatter communities, and some of them are even more primitive. I mean, people who literally just have bamboo sticks and a teepee sort of tarp, and whole families are living in these things. They're afraid of getting pushed out tomorrow. But in Brazil, at least in Rio, squatters have been able to interact with politicians and gain a degree of permanence. And in Turkey, squatters actually have legal protections, which is a truly amazing thing. Turkey has 2 laws that it would be great if every other country in the world had. One is the so-called gecekondu law. Gecekondu is a word in Turkish that means it happened at night. And basically, if you can invade a piece of land and build your house overnight, and it's habitable, and you're in it before the authorities catch you, they can't just summarily knock it down. They have to take you to court, which makes it a political fight. The second thing is, in Turkey, the second law, is that once you get 2,000 people in an area, whether legal or illegal, you can petition the government to be recognized as a sub-municipality. And once you're recognized as a sub-municipality, you have the right to an elected government and to impose taxes with which you can provide public services. So the squatter communities in Istanbul, once they develop 2,000 people in them, petition the government to be recognized as cities. And you find squatter communities with elected squatter mayors, squatter public works departments, squatter bus service, all organized by raising money through squatter taxes. It's an amazing thing, and it has enabled the Gecekondu communities in Turkey to become, as I said before, almost completely indistinguishable from the legal neighborhoods. So if Kenya had those laws, the squatters would be building the same way in Kenya. It might take longer because the economy is probably a bit more shaky than Turkey's economy, but the Turks wouldn't agree with that. But similarly in India, it doesn't happen because the squatters don't feel they have that kind of permanence. So what I'd like to do is close by reading one little thing and then entertain questions from you guys. Or I'll tell more stories. But I want to read something that sort of expands on what I just said. They all laughed, 6 men laughing, because I didn't understand their concept of land ownership. We were in a tea house in a dusty patch of Istanbul called Pashaköy, far out on the Asian side of the city. Here, the streets were dusty cuts hacked into the scrubby hills. Each home was caked, it seemed, with red earth. Even the giant blue plastic water barrels that stood in front of each house were coated with dust. The tea, the men joked, was exotic. It had come from far away. And Sadiq Charkir, the tea house owner, had hauled water from a spring several kilometers away. As we spoke, several women strode down the street with 5 buckets and a wheelbarrow, making a run to the source. Tapu var, I asked, do you have title deeds? They all laughed. Or more accurately, some laughed, some muttered uncomfortably, and some made a typical Turkish gesture. They jerked their heads back in a sort of half nod and clicked their tongues. It was the kind of noise someone might make while calling a cat or bird, but at a slightly lower pitch. And this indicates, are you kidding? Or, now that's a stupid question. Or more devastatingly, what planet are you from, bub? I blundered on. So who owns the land? More laughing, more clicking. We do, said Hassan Chalik, choking back tears. But you don't have title deeds. And this time they roared. And somebody, I forget who, whispered something to my translator. Why is this guy so obsessed with title deeds? Does he want to buy my house? You can't talk about squatters without talking about property. And property rights are something that we take very much for granted in the United States. But what we need to recognize is that talking about property involves different issues depending on where you are in the world. In the developed world, and particularly here, many people still view property in the same absolutist terms sketched out by William Blackstone, famous legal commentator from the 18th century. Property, he wrote, is, quote, that sole and despotic dominion which one man claims and exercises over the external things of the world in total exclusion of the right of any other individual in the universe. Property and despotism, that sole and despotic dominion, standing shoulder to shoulder. It's a distressing thought, but that's our property rights. It's a despotic control of property, and we consider it the root of all our liberties. But that is a modern, or a reasonably modern conception. Before Blackstone, property rights were a much less defined thing. And that's in part why they laughed at me all over the world when I asked these questions. Because when the squatters feel secure in their homes, whether they have a title deed or not, they build, they invest, they prosper. And they don't need a title deed to do that. They've accepted the unofficial division of personal possession. They buy and sell and rent their buildings. They negotiate with each other over the future plans for their homes. Now, the medieval Jewish sage Rashi said that being, or what it means to be a human being, to act, to live, to do things in the world, is essentially having a standpoint or a position, a place that you can call your own, a base of operations. And a massive number of people, 1 billion people so far, around the world have been denied that right. So they've seized land and built for themselves. And with makeshift materials, or at least starting out that way, they're building a future in a society that has always viewed them as people without a future. And in this very concrete way, they are asserting their own being. So we can learn from their example. They offer a different way of looking at land. And rather than treating it as an economic value, squatters live according to a more ancient notion that every person has a natural right, simply by virtue of being born, to have a home, a place, or a location in the world. And their way of dealing with land, I submit, offers the possibility of a more equitable city and a more just world. So, on that note, ask me questions. Questions, comments, questions?
Yeah, you said in Istanbul that they have a law where if you establish your home overnight and are living in it by morning, there are certain regulations or